Hello, and welcome to this episode of Rule of Carnage.
I never know if this is going to be an aggressive or a gentle intro. It's good.
Well, I'm,
We've
I'm,
gone gentle this time.
I was going to go for a thing. So these are a series of conversations that you might be watching on YouTube or listening to on a podcast, in which two games designers, myself, Glenn Ford, and my good friend Mike Hutchinson, have conversations about designing better miniatures games. We often talk in a range of voices. We might have a podcast voice, we might have a formal voice, we might have an overexcited voice. And when we're writing rule books, we adopt different voices and different tones at various points. So, a previous conversation we had on here, we were talking about vibes of your game generally. And Mike, you had an interesting message pop up from one of the listeners, watchers, in relation to vibes and the voice of the rule book. I don't know if you've got that up there, and you might.
Yeah. So James Allen commented on our last video on the topic of vibes. I often wrestle with the tone and character of my narrator within rules. Do you feel that rules should be more clean and clear or more fun and fluffy in their presentation? Like, should they be kind of coming from within the characters inside the world, or should they be like super technical versus vernacular and kind of easy to read? And another interesting one, should they be passive or imperative, like saying something is possible versus emphasizing that something is important? And yeah, this struck me as a really interesting topic that bounces off of the vibes question, but also you and I have both been kind of, I don't know, one of the points of this series of conversations, just as with our like game design writing, is an opportunity to introspect on our own processes so that we can learn what we're doing by looking at what we've just done and going, wait a minute, did we just do a thing on purpose or was that accidental? I wrote Space Gits in a somewhat urgent tone of voice, and you wrote Pukeapocalypse in a very specific tone of voice. And both of those were quite different to things that we've done before. And I think they might end up being different to things that we'll do in the future, or that that's not like our new solitary voice. So yeah, it turns out that we've been experimenting with voices in games and trying to figure out whether there's some way of creating a vibe. And I think also, if I'm honest, I'm feeling like Space Gits was a bit of a watershed for me in terms of the confidence of the way that I was communicating rules. And there are elements of the way that Space Gits is communicated that I would definitely carry over into like subsequent rule books and stuff. So yeah, retrospecting about the way that we communicate rules in a bit of a deeper way, I think is good fun and something we should chew on.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm not sure about the idea of like character narrators centrally placed within a rule set. I think there's a good place for them. Like, so Saga, I think the Saga rules have a very good example of this. That they have like a little box out. So originally it was this Viking dude who
Ragnar.
Ragnar, who, the rules get explained to you in a technical sense, and then Ragnar says, "Oh, so you can use this to do blah blah and blah," and he has opinions about the way you should fight and etc.
Mm.
etc. And what one of the things they did that was particularly nice in the second edition is that they had a secondary new character. So the second edition of Saga came out with the Crescent and the Cross, and so they had a new sort of Arabian character who was voicing the things that were new in the rules, and Ragnar was like talking to the old school because he was a hoary old Viking, and the new guy was like, "Well, there's a different way of doing things now." So it had these box outs that could like call attention to things in a sort of meta way, separately from the rules. And so I think there's definitely a place for like a sort of meta in character narrator being separate from the rules and commenting upon them. I'm not a big fan of putting like actual technical rules text into the voice of a character like that. Um, I
I
don't.
think yeah, it almost crosses over the sort of the diegetic membrane and is sort of like weirdly polluting one with the other. Having said that, I bet there is a game out there that would like really suit, whether it's like an interstellar wizards game, or it's some kind of like cyberpunk hacking thing, or so, like there's probably some world where you could make that work. I think it's an interesting challenge to see if you could make that work. But I agree, like instinctively, fully voice of an in-world character trying to explain you how many d6s to roll feels like it would get kind of, you'd have to bend over backwards to make it work in weird ways, and you'd maybe erode the understandability of it.
Yeah, I remember like ages ago, the old Shadowrun RPG had an expansion where the idea was that the weapons, it was a weapons manual and it had been hacked and some of the weapons had been like redacted, so you had whole pages that were unreadable because hackers had redacted these particular weapons, so they weren't like available to use in the game and they were no longer acceptable. And that was one of those things where like certainly like reading it originally I was like, well, am I meant to be able to try to figure out how to use this weapon? Is this intended to be something that I'm actually not meant to have access to? Is it
Mm,
like broken and unbalanced in the game? And I always remember like as a teenager sort of peering at these like black boxes trying to see if there was readable text that I could like hold up to the light and see through. And so I think there is like, when you have an in-character voice like addressing actual rules text, you can create confusion about, because we're so used to unreliable narrators or a level of unreliability
mm,
in narrators who have a viewpoint and have an opinion, that if they are stating the immutable facts of the game world, I do think you can get yourself sort of into trouble. And I think you can potentially create arguments at the tabletop where somebody's saying, well, it says here that that rule does X. And somebody, no, that's like Ragnar's opinion. He's of the opinion that it does this.
mm,
He's not the actual rules text. He's not the actual rules as written. He's a guy who has a particular perspective and a particular opinion, and he's not always right about things.
mm.
So I think that can be a difficult thing to levy and balance. And I always think like commentary within rules about rules and how to use them like tactically effectively, I think is always a very tricky thing to get right. Um,
I think one of the things that maybe also bounces off of this might be a pivot into the next topic, I'm not sure, but like I think a fair bit about how are we am I speaking from my perspective, or am I reading the text from the perspective of one human communicating to another human, or from a sort of slab like corporate face of like, is this a group authored text that is trying to instruct you in something versus like, a conversation between, two individuals.
Yeah, and I think that, yeah, that leads into the idea of like the vibe and how you create vibe, like with, so with the rule set and the way it's presented. So I think like, so yeah, as we sort of said, I think Space Skits and Pukeapocalypse are like on one side of creating the vibe like directly in the rules text. And like I said, one of my favorite lines in Space Skits is the "you can pre-measure whenever you like, but it won't fucking help you."
Mm,
That's a very specific sort of voice and vibe and feel to it. And Puke Apocalypse is full of things like that, where it says, this will happen and the guy will burst. Good. It is funny that he burst. Laugh at his stupid face when he dies. And it's like in Puke Apocalypse, I did that because one of the most difficult things that players are going to have to deal with in Puke Apocalypse is the fact that your stuff dies unpredictably, repeatedly, quickly, randomly, and it doesn't matter for like the overall arc of the game, and it shouldn't be something you get upset about.
mm,
So, like, addressing it in this voice of this sort of anarchic punk post apocalyptic live fast, die pointlessly world was
mm,
my way of trying to like sort of embed into people this idea that it is important that you not care when your guys die. It is important that you don't get upset by that. This is the
mm,
whole voice of this entire world. And that sort of like trying to build an attitude towards a game effect was the reason that I voiced Puke Apocalypse in that way, sort of throughout the rules. That's laid in there repeatedly. This sort of don't care punk attitude.
Mm.
I thought that was something that was always going to be a difficult line for people to get over as they played the game.
Because I think like there's something about Space Kits and Pukeapocalypse which is, you know, we're both trying a light-hearted, a comedic voice, and I think that that makes me think back to like some of like one of the pinnacles of like early discovering that rules could have their own voice was Paranoia, and the way that that's communicated is so specific and it's so embedded in its own world that like that's kind of a way of like that nudges in the direction of the like diegetic rules communication. Like it comes from within the world, and like every time a rule is explained it might be undermined by a sort of security warning from the omnipresent narrator of the rules text, or you might be given some unreliable information because you're not allowed to have more information or whatever. So I think that like um that all of that comes from the side of comedy. However, I was watching a review of Delta Green. I was watching Quinn's Quest review of Delta Green this morning as I was painting, and that's maybe an intriguing example of where like a very serious game has tried to communicate itself like from the perspective of an organization in order to communicate a vibe and communicate the fact that like it's a confusing labyrinthine bureaucracy, and so the ways that the rules are communicated is in a way sort of, design choices have been potentially made to make that feel more labyrinthine and bureaucratic, even in the way that the game functions and the way that it's being communicated. Um, and so, like, even there, the like me versus us, the like direct communication of the author voice versus a slightly more indirect or kind of, I don't exactly know how to say it. It's like a uh, yeah, it's an indirect voice. I'm not exactly sure of how to say that. It's like we wrote this as a team, and so like it's communicating itself in a passive language.
Yeah, I think the thing that's difficult for miniatures games in relation to this, in a way that's very different for example, an RPG,
Mm.
is diegetically the viewpoint of a player is very rarely actually the viewpoint of a given individual within the game.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
In
As opposed to an RPG where it's absolutely, one and the same camera view.
Yeah, in an RPG, by and large, you will be playing one person, like, for multiple sessions who will go through multiple things. And so having a voice saying, you are Dude X, I'm going to talk to Dude X as though he
Mm.
is who I believe him to be, and I will explain this world to him specifically. Whereas with a skirmish game or a mass battle game, where you sort of say, okay, you are Trooper Y, I'm going to talk to him as though he's an individual, and then Trooper Y gets his head blown off in like the first,
Yeah, and Trooper Y isn't who you inhabit as the player anyway. Yeah.
yeah, and I
Yeah.
think that's where like one example of a game I think that could, and this is I think potentially interesting because you're in the middle of working on it, sort of do this diegetically is A Billion Suns, because there's a viewpoint that in A Billion Suns you are a space fleet general stood in front of a like holographic table,
Mm.
nudging holograms around on this thing, and that then commands like the guys on those ships to do the things that you nudge the hologram around to do. And so you could, at a push, do that in completely diegetically, saying like,
Yeah, potentially, yeah.
it,
There's
it
like the merest suggestion of it in the first rule book where like the tutorial mission is presented as like basic training plus press Y to continue. Like there's just the very sort of smallest sniff of it.
yeah,
I
and then,
think that, sorry, go ahead.
yeah, no, like just saying, yeah, there is an option to put those rules out as the setup being,
Mm.
get a set of like representative holograms. You might be using solid physical miniatures, put them onto your heads up display table. This will be read and generated out, and you could do it completely
Yeah,
in
the
that.
question would be at what point would you just be like trying to push water uphill
Yeah,
to
they
to like clearly communicate a game
yeah
versus choosing the other route?
Yeah, I agree. And I think with a lot of these things, it's what you gain versus what you lose. Because what you gain by doing it in RPG is massive.
I agree.
Just,
Yeah.
they are absolutely sort of textured worlds in which you are expected to live. Fundamentally, miniatures games have, always have a level of abstraction and are at their heart about these sort of physical relationships between these miniatures, and there is almost always a level where you're asked to pull out and be a player playing the game and enjoy the game as a puzzle rather than fully immerse yourself.
That makes me think actually that one place that going much more diegetic could be really fun and valuable is if you skip over the core rules and you end up in the like construction of characters or the construction of war bands or whatever. Like that is a place where, you know, it's much more interesting to inspire people to like come up with their unique characters or come up with their specific reason for why their warband is in this world or what they're doing. You know, maybe it's like one of our games where you're trying to inspire kit bashing, and so like having more having more emphasis on the diegetic stuff versus the like rules reason for constructing teams, and doing that in a way that like the way that you deliver the rules is more coming from the voice of like, right, you know, corporal, we're gonna build a mech today, like, you know, oh, that's a bit expensive, you know, you sure you can afford that?
Yeah, I think there is an option there to like section these things out. So we've got a okay, here is the thing that I need to explain to you as a player in order to be able to operate the game world that I'm going to give you. And then once we've got all those grounded down, we can move into a right, now you are a pilot turning up at mech school and you're having to like select the bits of your mech. And
Mm.
even working that into a sort of miniature building thing of being like, lay out the bits of your miniature, and then you're going to have to pick bits and pieces and put them together. And I think like it's interesting because I do, and I think you do as well. Like already writing rule books, there's a layering thing of, okay, here's a section with the first things I need you to know before I'll need to be able to explain the things in the second section. So these
Mm.
are the high concepts, blah 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 blah. Right. Then section two with the slightly more detailed concepts that I still need you to understand these before you can get to section three, but I needed you to understand things in section one. So we do have these sections of like building up to an understanding of the rules element. And
Mm.
army building and scenarios are always at the back of the book, when all of that technical jargon has been explained. So
Mm.
I think there is potentially a place to be like, okay, you, the player, now understand the rules. Now I'm about to talk to the general, and I'm going to say to the general, okay, this is how you'll muster your forces.
Yeah, 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 yeah,
You
yeah.
know, but again, it's like I say, it's sort of it's difficult, and it depends very much on where you want to ground the player's perspective and how much you want to ground the player's perspective. Like, if they're a general, as in they're like, meant to be whatever, Wellington sat on a hill away from the actual combat, sending riders out, then I think you can get very sort of diegetic because it's like he's not meant to be in there getting his leg blown off by a cannonball,
Yeah.
so it is, sir.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And actually, like, scenario pointing to the scenarios is like that's another fun place to do it because so in Pacific Command recently I experimented with a new thing where, because I was working from these historical scenarios, I wanted to ground the um slightly odd asymmetric objectives that were going to be kind of just pure crunch. I wanted to ground them in something that helped people understand what was going on in that conflict. And so you get a sort of plain text briefing. It's in like italics. And so I use italics because it's like, you know, an old fashioned way of saying this is fluff. Like
Yeah.
this is flavor text. And so the flavor text is explaining the context of this battle and like what's led up to it and what your objective, like what you've been told in your like docket, you know, your telegram from Pacific Command or whatever. And that is really fun because both players get a different one of those, and then that like gets translated into like totally crunchy objective conditions. But like that you know, that also happens a little bit in A Billion Suns, where you get like a little bit of flavor text at the beginning of each of the contracts that you can end up rolling randomly for the missions. And so like you get a little like evocation of like why there are escaping scientists in little ships that you need to go and collect, and why that might be interesting to you. But it's not quite as richly explained as the way that I did it in Pacific Command, which is,
Mm. And
although having said that, it is quite historically, it's like a textbook explaining you. It's not like you're not like receiving a half garbled, partially like barked telegram from like your radio operator. You know, it's not done that diegetically. That would be cool. Like handouts for every scenario would have been cool.
yeah, and I think this is one of those things where there is an element of like physical product limitations on most miniatures games because they are not boxed games. They can't come with a bunch of different sealed envelopes that get handed out to different players.
They can't, but you could, you know, particularly if you're working in a more narratively bent skirmish game, you could definitely introduce the scenarios in a way, flavorful way.
You can, but it's like what the way that miniature games rule books tend to be presented and consumed in my experience is that one person purchases them,
Yeah,
reads them more or less cover to cover,
yeah,
and then sort of presents them to the other people, and then the
yeah.
other people dip into the rule books at certain points. It's like I was reading a review of a board game which is presented as being found in an abandoned factory at like the end of a print run, and you open it up and it has like a handwritten note from somebody in it, and the review's sort of saying, and it's to the point where it's got like pen bleed through on the note, although it's like obviously not been handwritten. It's very specifically,
Oh, that's mint. I love that. I hope that's a
yeah,
horror game.
yeah, it's well, so it's essentially an escape room sort of horror thing. You've got to like build and discover the game and its history as you're playing it and
Hmm.
like unlocking things.
Love it.
And that's one of the things where it's like
What's the name of that? Sorry.
I don't know the name of it.
All right. If you know the name, comment below.
I'll
Glenn will comment below when he remembers it.
I'll check the magazine and sort of and say later.
Ah, no, it sounds very cool.
But it's like that's one of those things where sometimes I'm so jealous of boxed games because
Hmm.
they really have that window to be like, okay, this book is the rules. This is like, then this can be like an outside of the world thing, and you read it and you understand the rules, and then these various envelopes are presented to certain players at certain points and give them different perspectives. It's like Betrayal at House on the Hill has the traitor book, and the traitor goes out of the room and reads their bit of the traitor book, and it can be presented in a completely different way from sort of all the other rules. And that's one of those things that is, it's not impossible to achieve, but it's basically impossible to achieve when what you've got is one book that is going to be given to one person who needs to consume that and then you know proletize it to their friends and sort of gaming group.
Yeah, I think this is one place where like event packets end up being quite kind of a cool way for that people achieve this today, which is like, you know, if you turn up to an event and everybody gets the same photocopied piece of paper or whatever, like you can have your stuff in there, or if you've got two teams or whatever, you can give them different piece of information or whatever.
Mm.
So there's definitely a pattern for this. And like, why, if you have to photocopy a gang record sheet, why shouldn't you also photocopy the little like handout that introduces the, like, you know, the mission for today or whatever? Like, it wouldn't be an unreasonable ask to say to, you know, hey, player one, like just make sure to, like, you know, photocopy or at least show this handout to player two.
Yeah, and it has potential, but again, it enters into that world of like limited content, because if it is this thing where it's like, well, it gets presented to player two when you play this scenario, and you've got six scenarios in the book, and you both play player two at some point in your gaming experience. The second time you play the scenario, that element of the content is gone, because you're like, well, I know what's in player one's packet.
Oh yeah, sure. No,
One
if
last
it's
time.
supposed to be a secret thing, yeah, no, absolutely, absolutely.
Um,
Anyway, so moving on from the diegetic versus non-diegetic, that was a rich theme like that. There's lots of things to think about there. Then the next part is like, what I guess I've started to think about as speaking directly with a confident authorial voice versus legally explaining rules in a sort of dry, passive, overly ornate way, which is frankly like how I have written rules in the past. Because I came from a fairly long history of technical writing in like a, software development world, I was quite confident with writing, precise procedural language. But I had yet to get confident with like more creative and more like direct writing. And so I've been changing my tone of voice just very generally from stuff which is overly passive and sort of legally, and just trying to like just basically trying to use plainer English, and like
Mm.
where there is a simple way to describe something. I'm affected by, reading books about plain English. I'm affected by, running some of my own text through reading age assessors and finding out, just being aware of like when I choose to use a word, could I have just used another word? Another thing is like having, the joy of having international audience and realizing that like the more finicky and filigreed I make my sentence construction or my word choice, just the more difficult it is for, a German or a Spanish or an Italian speaker to like pick through this and just be confident that they've understood exactly what I meant. Like it might be, 80% clear to a Brit that I've used this particular turn of phrase and it's slightly ornate and irritatingly old fashioned, but like we kind of know what I mean. But even then, there's still a bit. But then you try and translate that, or you try and get a non-native speaker to feel completely confident that they've grasped the point that you're making, and you could have just used a shorter sentence and a simpler word.
And also, and this is something I sort of speak about repeatedly and bring up to people when I'm reading over their rules, is as a writer, when writing, we are constantly sort of taught and trained to phrase something in different word sets when it's the
Oh
same thing,
God, yeah.
because it's prettier, it has a better flow. You don't want to reuse the same word, in sort of descriptive text if it, you know,
Yeah, just it looks unprofessional, lazy.
yeah. And whereas in rules text, I'm constantly going through to people and basically going, well, if these two sentences mean literally the same thing, they need to be worded the same way. I don't care which of the two wordings you pick one, copy and paste it every time you
Yeah,
need.
or the one that you're always catching me up is like if you've got sort of three very similarly shaped rules where it's like,
Mm.
you know, if you throw a punch, then this is what happens. If you throw a shove, then this is what happens. If you throw a pinch, this happens when you throw a pinch. It's like, well, why have you structured that sentence differently? Why can't we just have like visually and grammatically identical sort of, what's the word? It's like, is it like a moneme or something? It's like a little chunk of language that like
Yeah, yeah.
you like if you use these same little building blocks, and then like when you scan across it, the Lego looks pretty much the same, but you can see which Lego block is different, and so you're like, oh, I can see the difference. It's like it
yeah.
allows me to interpret the rules, to find the meaningful moment in the sentence.
Yeah, if step one is X then Y and step two is A then B, don't make step three Z will happen if W.
Yeah.
Don't like switch these things around. And it's like we want to do it. We want to sort of present things in different ways to keep people's attention. But good, clean rules writing is as sort of repeated format as humanly possible. And again, it's and I do.
And I'm not certain that fights against a direct sort of vernacular,
No, I
maybe even slang filled communication of the rules. It just means that sometimes you have to just be a bit weird.
No, I don't think it sort of is incompatible. And again, it's like in Pukeapocalypse, there's a constant voice of this very casual sort of punk thing. But when there are rules, they are presented in very specific, repeated language. And I think it's one of those things where it's like if you're having a conversation with somebody, and they're the sort of person who mucks around and makes jokes and messes about, and then you're talking about something serious, and they keep mucking about. It's the most infuriating thing. And it's like, you can be a fun person, and then when you're explaining to somebody that their dog's been hit by a car, you can stop making jokes about it and be like, no, this is it. You know what I mean?
Serious voice.
You,
Serious voice. You have to roll to hit.
you can have more than one gear. You can have more than one voice, and you can switch between them like within a paragraph. And I think there's like,
Yeah, definitely. And yeah, definitely.
and I think there's one of those, one of the Rick Priestley methods, which I'm not sure I 100% agree with, but he's like, paragraph one is telling them what you're gonna. This is how you shoot someone in the face. Paragraph two is step one, roll some dice. Step two, compare dice to a number. Step three,
Hmm.
resultant number causes a thing. And then paragraph three is, so if soldier fires his rifle and gets a 3 and a 6, he causes 2 damage to other soldier that he's hitting. And it's that 3-part thing of tell them what you're going to do it, and then tell them what you just did, sort of thing. And that
Yeah, or like provide the in more specifically in our language, it's like provide the specific conceit within the game which you are latching the rule to, the like narrative conceit, then explain the crunchy rule, then provide an example that brings that rule to life in an animated way.
yeah.
And
And
like partly it's about the three different learning styles that you're attacking, but it's also I don't know, it has felt a natural way of approaching things for me in many cases as well.
yeah, it's an oft repeated trope because it is effective, and it generally works for most rules in most places. And I think it's like, doing boards and black flags, again, I wrote Pukeapocalypse first, which has this very sort of in-world voice to it, because I'm trying to do certain things for the players. And going to borders and black flags, it's like, well, what I'm doing here is I'm telling a player how to play a game, and we're going to sit down and we're going to play a game.
You didn't
And
do a
so,
pirate voice all the way through.
so no, yeah, so that doesn't have a pirate voice all the way through. It has actually
Yargoo.
relatively little flavor
Ye
text.
coward.
Yeah, because it doesn't want to or need to give you. It's like there are spots like around the liar's dice. There's a point where I want you to act a bit like I want you to lie to your friend, and
Mm.
so at that point, we can talk a bit piratey and be like lie and cheat. But fundamentally, the aspect of a pirate is to lie and cheat, and I do not necessarily want you in that mindset as you are learning the immutable rules of the game. I don't actually want you to cheat.
Mm.
Cheating is a bad thing. So I want to talk to you as a player generally, about a rule set, and I don't want you to think like a pirate until like one moment, and then we want to stop thinking about a pirate again after we're past that moment.
Right.
The little sort of, this is how you cheat in this game. It's like the Mal.
Right. As opposed to in Space Kits, where I am very much inviting you to throw caution to the wind, as would a drunken orc at all points in, like, how do you move? How do you shoot? How do you make decisions about any of these rule systems? Well, it should be framed through your imagination of like, oh, well, I've had too much to drink and I'm just gonna, do this, that, the other.
Absolutely. In Pukeapocalypse, the whole thing is like, if two tokens that meant to be touching aren't touching, but they're kind of close enough, don't faff it, don't fiddle it, don't push it about. Just say, yeah, they're touching, because they
Mm,
were meant to be, move on and get going.
mm,
It specifically wants you to have this casualness in relation to bits of the rules, because it plays better when you are more relaxed about those things. Whereas other games can be like, no, 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 these bits, we're just doing it straight, play it straight, measure it properly, do it properly, and then, oh, here's a moment where I'm asking you to lie to your friend and do something which you shouldn't generally do in games. You shouldn't lie about what a dice says. That
mm,
is verboten generally in games. And here's a moment in, because we're doing lies dice and we're being pirates, where you're going to look at dice and you're going to lie about what it says to the other person. And
mm,
it's important that I box that out into a certain attitude and go like, well, the reason we're doing that is we are scallywag pirates and we lie
mm,
about stuff, but it's fine because here's a little structure that means you're not really cheating and blah blah blah.
mm.
So I think like deciding where the bits of your game's attitude are and shaping the diegetic voice around those specific bits, and boxing out the other bits are like, no, we're not having attitude about this, just measure it properly. This is how you
Mm.
measure a thing properly. I'm not going to pretend that, we're drunk, we're this, that, or the other. Get a tape measure, measure it. That's what it is. Whereas at this other point, we're like, and then be zany because this bit of the rules lets you go free.
Mm.
So I think, like, yeah,
Yeah, and I think that another, like as I was saying before, I think one learning is that being tight and technical does not necessarily mean you have to be long-winded and legally. I think there's a tendency at certain points, particularly when you've got like a dense bit of the rule system, to get quite finicky and legally, and I'm not against that because I think sometimes you need to. But like we had a fun example in the Discord recently where someone was trying to explain something that took like a really long triple clause to sort of explain, and it had a lot of conditionals inside it. And I was demonstrating how in those sorts of situations I tend to invent a named concept simply so I can hand an idea from one sentence to another sentence. So like when you shoot a model with a flamethrower, it like starts to burn, and when it's burning, that means that when you activate it, it's going to take a damage on the 4 up. Okay, so I'm going to call that on fire, and I'm going to have one sentence that says when you shoot someone with a flamethrower, they are on fire, and then a second sentence that says when you are on fire at the start of your activation, you do blah blah blah. And like using that kind of concept blocking
mm,
allows you to hand concepts from one sentence to another in a way that just it allows you to move away from that incredibly irritating style of legal, like we
yeah,
both read contracts and tried to understand them. Like there is a way that lawyers literally write that is incredibly irritating because they try and cover many bases in a single sentence, and they have lots of concepts buried inside it, and they also organize sentences in a way where the thing that you need to know is at the end of the sentence, and then you have to reread the entire sentence again with that last thing up front. And so I
yeah.
think that like if you want to learn how to write good game rules, go and read some contracts and don't do that.
Yeah, I think the thing with that that can be a very effective method. What it is also is it creates jargon within your game where you're like,
Mm.
when I say the word on fire, I mean specific paragraph of text over there. And I always think it's like, if you use the word that like on fire in three different places in like three, then that's a legitimate sort of usage of that thing. If there's one on fire instance in the entire rules, just put that paragraph in where the on fire is, you know.
Yes, although I still think it can be valid to use a named concept simply to pass that idea from one sentence to another. But I do agree that, like, when I'm choosing whether or not to do that piece of structuring, I'm looking at it and going, are you a thing that I would like as a hook for somewhere else? Like, even, and then sometimes you don't use it, and then it's like slightly irritating in the editing stage where you're like, why is this thing called on fire? Because, like, nothing affects, like, it seems like something should affect being on fire, but nothing does. Like and I'm like, yeah, there was a concept in Hobgoblin that I'm not going to be able to lay my mental finger on right now, where like it sounded like there was an important rule, and it was potentially going to be an important rule, and it had a name and it was capitalized, but like I never used that hook, and it turned out not to be important, and so it needed to get edited out.
Yeah,
um
and it could be true because like once or twice I've read rule sets and there's like a little bit of jargon laid in. I read the whole rule set and that jargon, it never happens. No thing ever uses that particular rule. And you sort of go to the person, why is it in there? You never actually use it. And it's, oh, I
mm.
forgot, or it slipped by.
Yeah, or it was like
Uh,
it was a part of an earlier draft, or I thought I might use it and it never ended up being used, or it
yeah.
might be useful in an expansion because like it's a thing that a faction could bounce off of or something, but I haven't done it yet.
Yeah. So I think that there's more to say about like the place for legalese and FAQs and things like that. But I think really this conversation has reached a decent length. So if you have played a game written in a diegetic style, a specific voice, You've really enjoyed the way it sort of immersed you in the world whilst effectively and efficiently communicating rules at the same time, please drop down to the comment section and tell us what that rule set was and what you found so delightful about it, because that's the sort of thing that people are going to want to read and study and recreate.
Yeah.
If you're down doing some commenting, hit the like and subscribe buttons, because that's right about where they are.
Yep.
And then check out the links section, where there will be a link to our Discord, where you can swing by and chat to other people about their diegetic experience with games. Go across to our Patreons, where you can support the channel directly by joining our Patreons, and go follow the various links to places where you can buy our stuff, back our games, pick up our books, and support us that way. But for now, I think from this episode of Rule of Carnage, it'll be a thank you and goodbye. Bye bye.
Goodbye.